Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Touring with Travis. My name is Travis Gilbert. I'm the Educator and Collections Coordinator at the Old Baldy Foundation. Chris Webb, our Executive Director, is behind the camera here. Our last duty of the week. You may have joined us this morning. We had a great episode of Quarantine Collections. We brought another staff member named Callie Gibbons. She joined us on the phone for that episode, and we discussed pottery sherds that were found at the Lighthouse grounds back at Old Baldy in a 1986 archaeological dig. But this afternoon, we're 3 miles from Old Baldy Lighthouse. I thought that I would bring you all my favorite location on all of Bald Head Island to conclude this week of virtual tours and virtual programming as we've been self-isolating due to this pandemic. On behalf of the entire Old Baldy Foundation, I hope that you and your family are safe, that you're healthy, that you've had some semblance of normalcy during this crazy week, and we thank you for joining us through all our programming this week that we brought to you virtually. So where is my favorite place? Where are we sitting on this beautiful Saturday afternoon? Well, we are at none other than Captain Charlie's Station. The 1903 keepers' cottages that served Cape Fear Light Station out on the pitch of Cape Fear. So before we get into the details of this beautiful location, I'm going to follow along on my phone here to our Facebook page. We already have quite a few listeners. Make this an interacting and great experience for everybody. Give us a shout out in those comments. Let us know where you're listening from. Let us know what your connection to Bald Head Island is. And if you have a question about Captain Charlie or Cape Fear Light Station, write it down in those comments. We'll answer that question, or we'll find an answer for you and post the answer a little bit later. So who was Captain Charlie? Well, his Christian name was Charles Norton Swan. He was born in late August of 1873 at Amelia Island Lighthouse. It's in northern Florida, just north of St. Augustine, almost in Georgia, right across the Georgia line. And he was born to a lighthouse keeper named Henry Swan. He was a Norwegian immigrant. He came to America through New York, and he served as a blockade runner during the American Civil War. These river pilots, these men like Henry Swan, who helped guide ships laden with war materials into ports like Wilmington to supply the Confederate or Southern armies. And when they dropped off all those war materials in ports like Wilmington, they'd load up those ships, again called blockade runners, full of cotton or any raw agricultural materials, and they would guide those ships out the river like the Cape Fear, take them to the Bahamas, take them to Bermuda, where they'd load all those bales of cotton onto larger ocean-bearing vessels, take those ships across the Atlantic to Europe, trade that cotton for more war materials that would be imported back into Bermuda, back into the Bahamas, where folks like Henry Swan would be waiting to guide those ships full of war materials back into the Cape Fear River, back into the port of Wilmington, to supply those Confederate armies, pick up more cotton, and do it all over again. So it's during the Civil War that Henry Swan became familiar with Southport, became familiar here with Bald Head Island or Smith Island, became familiar with Frying Pan Shoals, this sandbar that extends roughly 25-30 miles off of the pitch of Cape Fear in a southeastern direction into the Atlantic Ocean. It's a great barrier to shipping. These ships, they got to go out and around those shoals, because if they try to go through the shoals, they're going to end up crash to ground like our dear pirate friend Steve Bonnet. during the Battle of the Sandbars in 1718 in the mouth of the Cape Fear. And alas, that's another story. Look back on our Facebook page or YouTube channel for that story we brought you yesterday afternoon. But back to Captain Charlie. Hey, Lori Belk-Owen. It's good to see you. Thank you for joining us, Lori. Give us a shout out, folks. Let us know where you're listening from. So back to Captain Charlie. Yeah, so his father was a blockade runner or a river pilot during the Civil War in these parts. And once peace was declared, Henry Swan joined the Lighthouse service. He was a lighthouse keeper at Amelia Island, where Captain Charlie was born. And eventually life brought him to Frying Pan Shoals Lightship. Frying Pan Lightship. It was this ship that was anchored roughly 30 miles at the end of that sandbar off of the point of Cape Fear, and it had a light on board. It was anchored in place. It sat there weeks at a time, bobbing back and forth, and that served as a marker so ships knew they had to go out and around Frying Pan Lightship, and that was safety. They went in between Frying Pan Lightship and Bald Island. That was danger. They could crash aground. Well, Captain Charlie, he joined the Lighthouse service following in his father's footsteps when he came of age. And the Lighthouse service took him to his father's lightship out there 30 miles offshore of where we are standing. And that's where Captain Charlie got his start in the Lighthouse service. He did serve in the USS Cheyenne warship in the Navy during the Spanish-American War around the turn of the 20th century. And after surviving that war, Captain Charlie came back home to America and continued this career in the United States Lighthouse service. He had an office job down in Charleston. It's where he met his wife, Marie. Eventually, they sent him to a place we know today is Ponce de Leon Lighthouse. Back then in Captain Charlie's times, they knew it as Mosquito Inlet Lighthouse. And it was there that his eldest daughter, Margaret, was born. And you may be familiar with Margaret because we shared her oral history with you all earlier this week. Let's take a look at these comments. Mackie, hey, I finally got it at the beginning. Congratulations, Mackie. Hey, you saved the best for last. And you are at my favorite place, too. I'm jealous. Mackie, I wish we could share this afternoon with you out here at Captain Charlie's. Hopefully very soon. Amanda Panusis, hey, Travis. Ashley and I are listening from Florida. Hey, Amanda, how are you? It's been way too long since I've run into y'all. I saw your mom and dad just a few days ago. We passed on the golf carts. I hope you and Ashley are healthy and y'all are safe down in Florida. Ashley, hey Ashley, I see y'all. Thanks for joining in the Panusises. And Helen Berry, so jealous. Can't wait to come back to the island. I am sharing all this history with my husband and kids who grew up visiting the island. Well, Helen, we can't wait for you to come back to Bald Head as well. And thank you for sharing our videos with your family. We hope that they are healthy. Lastly, Barb, hello from New Hampshire. Which part of New Hampshire, Barb? Ken, listening from Springfield, Missouri. Springfield, Missouri. There was a Civil War battle there. I know places in the United States by whether there was a Civil War battle there or not. I'm that much of a nerd. So, hey Ken. Oh, it's Ken Hamby. Oh my gosh, Chris knows Ken Hamby. It's good to see you all. It's been way too long since I've talked to y'all. I hope you and Darla are doing well. We miss you here in Wilmington. Ken's a doctor. I hope you're healthy and you're being safe. Thank you for everything that you are doing and the other doctors and health professionals that are listening out there. So back to Captain Charlie. Yeah, it's again, he followed in his father's footsteps, first serving with his father on Frying Pan Lightship, anchored some 30 miles offshore of Bald Head Island. Then he had a desk job in Charleston, is where he met his wife, Marie. Then they sent him to, today, Ponce de Leon Lighthouse. It's where his first child, Margaret, is born. After that, they send him to Amelia Island Lighthouse, Little Cumberland Island Lighthouse, lots of different places in between. And then in August of 1903, Captain Charlie gets the opportunity of a lifetime. He applies for a job at the newly established Cape Fear Light Station on Baldy Island. He gets the job, and in early August of 1903, he arrives back on Baldy Island. He had been familiar with Baldy Island, not just from serving out there in Frying Pan Lightship with his father. Captain Charlie also, as a teenager, helped his good friend John L. Watts. John L. Watts was the keeper of Cape Fear Life-Saving Service Station, located here on Baldy Island. You may recall earlier this week we shared Keeper Watts' property returns. They're in our archives. 1911, Keeper Watts has a heart attack here on Baldy Island. Captain Charlie is the man that helps get his body back to Southport, but again, I digress. The point is, at around 12 years old, Captain Charlie, he was familiar with this island by helping his good friend and his mentor, John L. Watts, by cooking and cleaning and odds and end jobs at Cape Fear Life-Saving Service Station, in between his role out there with his father on the lightship. So what a homecoming it was to come back home here in 1903 and begin a 30-year career as principal keeper of Cape Fear Light Station on Baldy Island. He is the man on August 31st, 1903 that lit the wick inside that 6,000-pound first-order Fresnel lens, 150 feet in the air at the top of Cape Fear Light Station, a light that would only be extinguished about 2 times until 1958, when it was decommissioned by the Coast Guard. Well, Captain Charlie, he lived with his wife and his kids here at this keeper's cottage, the porch that we are on. There were so many responsibilities, so many tasks at Cape Fear Light Station that he had 2 assistant keepers. And they lived in those cottages beside us, again, all built in 1903. They assisted Captain Charlie in all the daily tasks and the roles of cleaning and polishing the lens, of fueling the lens, of keeping the station tidy, carrying supplies back and forth between Baldy Island and Southport. And they had really created the first community here on Baldy Island. Between these 3 families and the families that are living with John L. Watts out at the life-saving service station, just behind us here, maybe a half-mile away, they had lots of kids, they had their wives, they had mothers, they had extended family members visiting. We know there was at least one Halloween where they had a square dance together out here on Baldy Island. Christmas times were a joyous occasion. They'd usually collect a pot of money and send somebody over to Southport to get some presents. Captain Charlie was a devout Methodist, a devout Christian all his life. He definitely read from the Bible weekly. Christmas was spent with a Bible lesson. They would decorate this station. They would go collect a cedar tree from back in the Maritime Forest and make some wreaths and other bunting and various decorations for the cottages here. We know at least one Christmas, their grandmother from Charleston brought up some fireworks, and they had quite a fireworks show out here on the Cape for Christmas time. So again, it's Captain Charlie that really begins honing or grooming the first community to establish itself here on Baldy Island amongst all these federal employees. Let's check back here on the Facebook page, see if anybody's listening. Southern New Hampshire, Baldy Island is our annual girls' weekend trip. Barb, we have lots of girls' trips here on Baldy Island, so we're happy you can join us, Barb, here virtually until you can have your next girls' weekend. So in 1915, Captain Charlie lost his first wife, Marie, to tuberculosis. She didn't die here in the cottage. They were able to get her back to Southport, where they had established a second home, a town home, if you will, and that is where she passed away. And Captain Charlie ended up remarrying his late wife's nurse. Her name was Bessie. And with Bessie, he had 2 stepchildren that he adopted. And Bessie and Captain Charlie ended up having 3 more additional kids. So 10 kids Captain Charlie fathered. At some point or another, they're living here at this cottage. At least later on in his career, they're mostly living in Southport, where schooling was better. Now, can you imagine what trouble 10 kids could find themselves in this abandoned barrier island with nothing else much out here? All kinds of trouble back there in the maritime forest just waiting to find these children. So Captain Charlie invented this mythological creature called a Yahoo. Yahoo lived back in the scrub of the maritime forest, had sharp fangs. Its head was shaped like a hoe, and it would be used to decapitate anybody that came across its path. Had quite an appetite for small children. Captain Charlie took this myth-making so far as to make a plaster cast of the Yahoo's footprint. And that was used as a positive reinforcement to the rule of get home before it gets dark. That's how Captain Charlie scared all his kids and probably all the other kids from the keepers' families into getting home before it gets dark, before they got into trouble out there alone in the maritime forest. We hear every so often that the Yahoo still lurks around these parts and is still used by parents today to keep their kids in line when they're vacationing or when they're staying here on Bald Head Island. We have that footprint back at the museum. One of, I think, a few that were cast back in the day. Captain Charlie also loved to tell this ghost story. Anybody that would listen, or the kids, I'm sure that he told it at plenty of Halloweens in between square dancing out here. It has all to do with these shoals offshore here. It was said that in late 1812, the only daughter of the 3rd Vice President of the United States, Aaron Burr, probably most famous for killing Alexander Hamilton in a duel in the early 19th century, just across the Hudson from New York City. Well, anyway, his only daughter, Theodosia, ended up marrying a Georgetown, South Carolina rice planter named Joseph Alston. They had a baby boy that passed away from probably malaria or some kind of swamp fever in July of 1812. So it was decided that a trip up north to see her father, Aaron Burr, still residing in New York City, would lift her spirits. Theodosia was going through some health problems herself, and it was thought that the doctors up north might be able to find a cure for her ailments. So on the final days of 1812, Theodosia boarded a schooner called the Patriot down in Georgetown. And when the Patriot left Georgetown, South Carolina, it was never heard from again. Now, Captain Charlie would tell folks that it crashed aground accidentally out there on Frying Pan Shoals. And there were pirates, or there were wreckers. Not pirates in a sense of Stede Bonnet. That was 100 years before Theodosia's lifetime. But wreckers, men living here on Bald Head Island that took an opportunity when they saw a shipwreck to collect the cargo from that shipwreck and sell it for their own profit back on the mainland. Well, they see the shipwreck of the Patriot. They board the Patriot. They kill the entire crew. They begin salvaging the cargo, and they find Theodosia. They take her captive, and when she admits that she's Aaron Burr's daughter, they think there's even more money to be made here. They can extort some money out of her very famous and wealthy father. Well, somehow she escapes, and she is accidentally killed. And according to Captain Charlie, she's buried in an unmarked grave here on this hillside where these cottages rest today. So Captain Charlie would tell folks that Theodosia's ghost haunts this island, looking out there for another ship to take her back home. Now, the caveat is that every sea island in between Georgetown, South Carolina, and Cape Hatteras claims Theodosia's ghost. Everybody has their own little version of the story. Ours comes from none other than Captain Charlie, so I dare say which is the true story, or what actually claimed Theodosia's fate. Patty Henson, listening from Missouri. My dad was stationed there during World War II. Yes, Patty, I think we've talked before. We have some really great photographs of your father and his coastie comrades. We're going to be sharing some history of those photographs and of that Coast Guard station probably next week. So stay tuned, Patty. Thanks for listening. So Captain Charlie's career ends 30 years after first lighting Cape Fear Light Station in the year 1933. And it was just a few months after Captain Charlie probably had the most horrific day on the job. You see, Captain Charlie was waiting atop Cape Fear Light Station for his assistant, Devaney Jeanette, to release him from duty. And when Devaney Jeanette reached the top of that 150-foot light tower, he opened the door, he greeted Captain Charlie, and then he collapsed and died instantly in Captain Charlie's arms. You think that light is flashing once every 10 seconds, and he died shortly after midnight, so for Captain Charlie, it would have been bouts of complete darkness and every 10 seconds a flash that would have illuminated his community member, his neighbor, and his co-worker dead in his arms. Somebody was able to get to the Coast Guard station down on South Beach. The Coast Guardsmen came up. They had to tie Devaney Jeanette's body up on a rope and lower him all 150 feet down the tower. And they eventually got him back to Southport, back home where he rests up in the Outer Banks. Captain Charlie retires just a few months later. You can kind of connect the dots. I imagine that Captain Charlie saw his own mortality in that horrific day and promptly called it quits. He lived out the rest of his life over in Southport. He wasn't over here when they blew up his lighthouse, Cape Fear Light Station, in 1958. He did get to say goodbye to his lighthouse before they blew it up. We are aware, although it's not in our archives, of a silent black and white film of Captain Charlie waving goodbye at the entrance to that light station just a few days before they blow it up with dynamite. Captain Charlie was on Oak Island in May of 1958 when the light at Oak Island Lighthouse was switched on for the first time. And we know that because it was Captain Charlie himself who had the honor of flipping the switch to turn on Oak Island Lighthouse for the very first time. And of course, Oak Island Lighthouse being the lighthouse that is still in commission, that is still in operation, that replaced Captain Charlie's light out here on Baldy Island. He did some odd and end work for Trinity Methodist Church over in Southport. Don't forget, he was a devout Christian. And he passed away shortly after suffering a stroke in 1964. He rests over in the old Smithville Burying Grounds. His family is still local to Southport. His eldest daughter, Margaret, her son, Ron Hood, still alive and well over in Southport. He's a great supporter of the Old Baldy Foundation. And our archives and our collections are the repository for many of his effects, including his pocket watch, his binoculars, and many of his official papers from his days in the Navy, from his days down in the Florida and Georgia lighthouses, and from his tenure, his 30-year career as principal keeper here at Cape Fear Light Station. Today, these cottages are very popular rentals owned by Bald Head Island Limited, LLC. They're my favorite place on the island, and probably for many listeners out there, they're also your favorite place here on Bald Head Island. check up here on our Facebook page, see if we're missing any more comments. Fred S. Baker, one of the ferries is named after that ship. You were absolutely right, Fred. One of the 4 ferries in our fleet for Bald Head Island transportation is named the Patriot, after that ill-fated schooner that disappeared from history sometime in late 1812, early 1813, off the North Carolina coastline. Fred, I never understood the logic of naming a ferry I have to ride on almost every day after a ship that disappeared in the Atlantic Ocean. Every time I have to board the Patriot, I get this little queasy knot in my gut. I'm thinking, I don't really know if that was a great idea to name one of our ferries after an ill-fated ship. Donna Sutherland, excellent presentation. Thank you. Hey, thank you, Donna. Thank you for all your support. You've been watching so many of our videos, and we really appreciate your kind words. Susan, how old was he when he passed away? Susan, I'm going to put the answer to that in the comments, but I feel pretty certain that he was 91 years old. He was born in 1973, and he passed away in 1964, so 91 years old. I think he was about a month into his 91st year when he passed away. Great question, Susan. If that wasn't correct, I'll post the correct response in the comments. Hey folks, thank you for joining us all this week. We're going to be entering our 3rd week of doing videos when we return on Tuesday. Remember, my weekends are Sunday and Mondays, so we really appreciate all your support. It's really thrown us for a loop with the Old Baldy Foundation. We had just opened up for the season, and then we made the decision for the health and safety of all our staff, volunteers, and visitors to close down operations. So these virtual videos have been a way to connect with folks that would be visiting us in person this time of year. So thank you for all your kind words, for stopping Chris and I and other staff members on the street by saying how much you've enjoyed the videos and that you've shared them with all your family. We're going to come back starting on Tuesday with more great virtual content at 10 a.m. from our collections back at the museum. And then at 2 o'clock, we'll be bringing you some little piece of the island here to talk about its role in the story of Bald Head Island. Ashley, thank you. We really appreciate your support.
Ashley and Amanda were both volunteers for us when they were teens.
Little tykes?
Yes, they worked in the gift shop.
They are 2 bright young ladies, and I know that their mom and dad are very, very proud of them. So, Amanda and Ashley, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you soon. You stay healthy down there. Some other comments, I don't know, what announcements. Check out our new website. Our new website is really great. We also have a new online store. Our staff members who have been working remotely have been putting in just as much work behind the scenes as you've seen in front of the camera since we've closed down for operations. So throw them a bone, throw them a nice comment or two. Check out all their hard work on that beautiful new website and that great online store. All kinds of books and puzzles to keep you busy during these crazy times, and perhaps to have a little piece at home of Bald Head Island until you can get back here in person. Don't forget about our historic happy hour on April 8th. We're going to be bringing it to you virtually. There's information on our website. Sign up for our monthly newsletter. Usually the tickets for our historic happy hours are $15, but since essentially it's BYOB, we're going to do this virtually free. And there is a free code or coupon in our monthly newsletter that you can use to purchase your tickets. If you'd like to purchase a ticket for $15, we, from the bottom of our hearts, would very much appreciate that support to continue this education, this interpretation, and preservation of the story of this beautiful island that we all have come to hold very dear to our hearts. So on that note, thanks for listening, folks. Stay healthy. Keep a smile on your face. Stick with it. Thank you to all our health professionals. Have a great Travis weekend. We'll see you on Tuesday.